The sun had long since set, and the moon was hidden behind a thick layer of clouds, casting an eerie darkness over the small town of Willowdale. Rachel walked alone down the deserted street, her heart pounding with each step. She knew she should have never accepted the ride from a stranger, but the chance to make some extra cash was too tempting to resist. Now, she was regretting her decision as she looked around at the unfamiliar surroundings. Suddenly, a black van with tinted windows pulled up beside her, and the door slid open. Before she could react, a strong hand grabbed her and pulled her inside. The van sped off into the night, leaving Willowdale behind. Rachel was thrown onto the cold metal floor of the van, her hands and feet bound with tight ropes. She could hear the muffled sounds of two men talking in the front seat, but she couldn't make out what they were saying. She tried to scream, but her mouth was covered with a cloth. Hours passed as the van drove further and further away from civilization, deep into the woods of Blackwood Forest. Rachel's heart sank as she realized that no one would be able to hear her screams out here. Finally, the van came to a stop, and the men opened the back doors. Rachel was dragged out into the darkness and forced into a small shed. The room was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Rachel's captors began to taunt her, telling her what they had planned for her. She was going to be sold to the highest bidder, they said, a victim for whatever twisted desires the buyer had in mind. Days passed in the dark and cold shed, with no food or water. Rachel's mind began to play tricks on her, and she couldn't tell if she was awake or asleep. She heard strange whispers in the darkness, and felt the presence of something sinister lurking in the shadows. One night, Rachel was awoken by a loud banging on the door. The men rushed into the shed, grabbing her and dragging her out into the woods of Ravencliff Hills. They threw her into a hole in the ground, lined with dirt and rocks. As they began to bury her alive, Rachel screamed for help, for mercy, for anything, but no one could hear her desperate cries. Days later, Rachel's body was found by a group of hikers. The local authorities launched an investigation, but the men who had kidnapped and murdered her were never caught. The town of Willowdale never forgot the horror that had taken place in their backyard. Parents kept their children close, and everyone locked their doors at night, fearing that the men who had taken Rachel were still out there, waiting for their next victim. The woods of Blackwood Forest and Ravencliff Hills became known as places of terror, where evil lurked in the shadows.